there are several barriers for smallholders and communities at the moment. One of which is the complexity of the current Ecosystem Service Procedure, which is complex in its explications. It's very technical in its wording, and it's really difficult for a practitioner to apply in practice in a community setting, for instance. So one thing that we really need to do is to try and simplify the standard or the procedure itself, but also provide much better guidance on how, if you're a certain type of certificate holder, if you're a community, for instance, and you want to make a claim based on conservation, then you have to do this and this and that, and be much more clear about that, so you don't get confused about all the other parts of the procedure. And then the other thing that is really, really difficult for a lot of communities and smallholders is that it's so closely linked to a full FM certification. So for instance, if you are a community and you're producing rubber or some fruits or something that is recollected in the forest, you actually have to go through a complete FM process before you can get access to the ES procedure. And that's something that the technical working group is looking into, ways of simplifying this process, both in terms of the criteria that you are to implement to get FM, but also to see if we can do some shortcuts for communities that are, for instance, into conservation or in non-timber forest products, because they pose a very low risk for any negative impacts on the forest management. So those are some of the things that we're working on in the technical working group. And also the number of ecosystem services are very limited at the moment, and some of them are not very relevant for communities. So we're also looking into adding services more in the direction of cultural services or even spiritual services. That many communities and indigenous peoples are very closely linked to the forest resource, for instance, and they don't only use them for food and other things, but also it's part of their life, so to speak. So the cultural value and the spiritual values are also very important for them. And of course, lastly, if you ask most communities, what usually concerns them the most is actually the socio-economic services and values that they get from the forest. It's like housing, materials, food, products they can sell, might be non-timber forest products, for instance, and also put value on those services in the ecosystem service procedure in the future. Because I think to motivate communities to get certified and go through all these things and processes, you really need to find the core of what is the interest of the community as well, and not only the sponsor that is interested in buying or sponsoring claims from a community or smallholder. And to be quite frankly, I of course get the same question all the time, and also it's one of the reservations I have when I'm advising communities on how to go about the management of the resources. Currently I wouldn't advise them to try and go for ecosystem services unless they're already certified, because it would be so costly and difficult to get first full FM and then ecosystem services that it would be completely economically very unfeasible. I would almost call it insane to go that way. And so it's really, really important that the FSC in the future will engage much more in trying to establish the links between potential sponsors and communities and smallholders. Because if you don't have a sponsor, then you would rely on donors, for instance, to pay the costs of the process leading to a claim. And even if you get a donor to pay for that, the community will also be really disappointed if then you have these claims, you've done all these things, and then at the end of the day you don't find the sponsors. So it's all been a waste of time basically for the community. So I think it's really, really important to have a strong focus on how to first of all make the claims interesting for sponsors, potential sponsors, and then really work with companies, donors, governments. I mean, governments are actually quite important in this, I think, because a lot of governments, they have to report to the UN system, and they have an interest in showing that communities, for instance, are doing something to protect biodiversity, protect carbon stocks in their forests, etc., etc. So it could also be linked to government policies, for instance, and government funds sponsoring good management in that sense.